warehouse doors came off their hinges at 2:14 a.m. They came off in the way that doors come off when someone has made a decision about them that does not include the possibility of them remaining attached, a sharp, concussive charge on each hinge point, the sound of it compressed in the close air of the building into something that was less like an explosion and more like a physical argument the walls were losing. The doors went inward, and the first SUV came through 3 seconds later, and then the second, and then the tactical team that had been waiting outside, in a silence so disciplined it had made the surrounding darkness feel organized. They moved through the warehouse in the specific way of people who have done this many times in many buildings, and have developed a relationship with the variable of what might be inside that is more clinical than fearful. The officer who had gone in ahead of them was in the back office. He was standing with a gun at the head of a man in a faded hoodie who was sitting in a chair with his hands cuffed behind his back, and he had been on his radio approximately 90 seconds earlier with the self-satisfied energy of a man announcing a thing he expected to be congratulated for. And now he was standing with 27 red laser dots on his chest and an expression that was moving rapidly through several stages of understanding that were each worse than the one before. The CIA director came through the back office door. She looked at the officer. She looked at the man in the chair. She looked at the officer again. "Take those cuffs off him," she said. Her voice was not raised. It had the quality of a voice that had never needed volume to communicate the full weight of what it was saying. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Tyson Cross had been inside the warehouse for 4 hours and 11 minutes when the officer came through the back window. He had been in position since 10:03 p.m., 37 minutes before the timeline called for him, because Tyson had been early to everything for 15 years and had no particular interest in changing that policy on an operation with this much riding on it. The warehouse was a distribution hub for a cartel logistics network that the agency had been mapping for 22 months. The back office, specifically the filing system in the back office, specifically the ledgers in the third drawer, contained documentation that would allow federal prosecutors to establish the financial architecture of the network in a way that 11 previous operations had failed to establish, because the network was careful about its digital footprint and kept certain records in physical form precisely because physical records required physical access. Tyson was the physical access. He was 35 years old. He had grown up in Baltimore, the middle child of 3, the son of a postal worker father and a school librarian mother who had between them built a household organized around the specific values of steadiness and preparation and the quiet understanding that the world would not adjust itself to accommodate you, which meant you needed to be prepared before you arrived at it. He had taken that lesson seriously. He had joined the Army at 19. He had been recruited by the agency at 23, following 2 deployments and a psych evaluation that one of the evaluators had described, in language she had since slightly revised, as producing a profile she had seen 3 times in 15 years, and that consistently predicted certain kinds of operational excellence. He had said yes to the agency for the same reason he said yes to most things. Because the work seemed important, and because he believed he could do it well, and because doing it well seemed like the right use of what he was. 12 years later, he had done it well in 11 countries, under 7 covers, in contexts ranging from diplomatic surveillance to deep cover infiltration to direct action support to what he was currently doing, financial intelligence collection in a hostile environment, which was a formal description for sitting in the dark in a cartel warehouse, photographing ledgers in near-zero light conditions with a camera that produced forensically admissible images. The specific quality that had made him exceptional at this work was not the physical training, though the physical training was considerable. It was not the technical skills, though those were real. It was what the evaluator had identified in the original psych assessment and what Tyson had spent 12 years refining into something more deliberate than instinct. The ability to be entirely present in a situation without being emotionally reactive to it. To receive information, threat information, dangerous information, information that had clear personal stakes, and to process it with the same calm, methodical attention you would give to a quarterly report or a piece of ambient noise. He worked in the dark because light communicated, and this building was not supposed to be communicating. He had a headlamp but hadn't turned it on. The camera's infrared sensor gave him what he needed in near-zero light. Page by page, methodical, shutter near silent. He was on the 19th page of the third ledger when he heard the window. He heard it the way he heard most things, not with alarm, not with the physical response of a system being startled, but with the specific quality of attention of a man whose nervous system had long since learned to process incoming sensory information at a speed and calmness that most people never develop, and that felt, from the inside, simply like the world being legible. The window was on the north side of the building. The sound was the specific sound of a latch being worked from the outside, not forced, just worked, the way someone works a latch who has not been told the latch was alarmed. Which it was not, because Tyson had entered through a different point and had left the north window precisely as it was so that it would not communicate that the building had been accessed. He lowered the camera. He did not move from the chair. He waited. Officer Dane Pruitt had been on the Madera County Sheriff's Department for 4 years, which was long enough to know the job and not quite long enough to know everything the job required knowing, including the specific and absolute rule about federal operational perimeters and what happened to people who crossed them without authorization. He was 29 years old. He had grown up in Fresno, the son of a contractor father who had built things with his hands his entire life and who had communicated to Pruitt, through example rather than explicit instruction, that a man's value was in what he actually did rather than what he was positioned to do. He had taken this seriously. He had been good at most things he attempted. High school athletics, the police academy, the early phases of his career, and had developed from this accumulation of success a conviction about himself that was not entirely wrong and was also not as accurate as he believed it to be. The gap between the conviction and the accuracy was where most of his problems originated. He had arrived at the federal perimeter at 11:30 p.m. as part of the Sheriff's Department's supporting role, holding the outer perimeter, maintaining civilian exclusion, waiting for the federal teams to conduct their operation and involve the local department in whatever way the federal coordinator deemed appropriate. The federal coordinator had been clear and direct in the specific way of people who have coordinated with local law enforcement many times and have learned to be extremely precise about what they were asking for. Hold the perimeter. Do not enter the building. The federal tactical team will breach at 0200. Pruitt had said he understood. He had shaken hands with the coordinator, a man named Marcus, who had the bearing of someone who had spent significant time in environments where being vague was not a survival strategy, and who had communicated the instructions in a way that left no room for interpretation. Pruitt had understood. He had held the perimeter until 1:45 a.m. What shifted at 1:45 was not dramatic. There was no specific provocation. It was the convergence of a series of small inputs. The long wait, the cold, the particular restlessness of a man who was action-oriented by training and disposition and who was currently assigned to stand in a parking lot and observe a building that produced a decision that felt from the inside like instinct and was, from the outside, exactly what Marcus had been precise about preventing. He had looked at the north side of the building and seen what he thought was movement. He had assessed that a man of his skills and experience could be inside, investigate, and return before the 0200 breach. He had calculated that if he found something significant, he would be the officer who had found it, and that this would be a thing worth having done. He had worked the north window. The latch had been easy. He had taken this as a good sign. He had moved through the warehouse floor with his flashlight off, phone passive display for orientation, and had found the back office by following what he believed was a light source under the door. He had pushed the door open. The man in the chair was not moving. He was sitting with his hands visible and his back straight and his face turned toward Pruitt's flashlight with the specific quality of calm that Pruitt registered as suspicious, because it was the opposite of what he expected, and the opposite of what he expected had trained him to read as wrong rather than as information he did not yet have the context for. He had made his assessment. It had taken approximately 4 seconds. He had arrived at his conclusion and acted on it. "Don't move," Pruitt said. The man did not move. Hands behind your back. The man complied, slowly, visibly, with the deliberate movements of someone who was making every action legible. He placed his hands behind his back. Pruitt applied the handcuffs. In the moment of contact, he registered that the man's wrists were entirely still. No tension, no resistance, no trembling. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that should have told him something. It didn't. "You're under arrest," Pruitt said. He straightened. "What's your name?" The man said nothing. "I said, what's your name?" Silence. "Cartel? You work for these people?" He gestured at the filing system, the ledgers, the general environment of what he had decided this was. "I've been watching this building all night." The man in the chair looked at him. Not through him, not past him. At him, with the patient, informational attention of a man who has decided that what is in front of him does not yet require him to do anything. It was, Pruitt would later try and fail to describe to people who asked, the strangest experience he had ever had looking at another person. Not threatening, not afraid, just waiting. The way something waits that already knows how the thing ends. He didn't have language for it. He filed it as composure and reached for his radio. He pressed the transmit button with the satisfaction of a man who has been waiting for a significant moment and is pleased it has arrived. "Control, this is Pruitt. I'm inside the target building, back office. I've got one in custody. Adult male, appears to be a cartel associate, requesting backup for prisoner transport." He did not finish the sentence. He was still acting on his assessment when the doors came off their hinges. The charges were small, shaped specifically for the hinge points, sized to move doors without destroying the structural integrity of the building, because this building and everything in it was evidence, and evidence required preservation. The tactical team had been using charges of exactly this specification for 14 months across 9 operations and had the application time down to 38 seconds for a 2-door entry point. The doors went inward. The first SUV came through. Tyson, in the chair in the back office with his hands cuffed behind him, heard the doors and felt, not for the first time in his career, the particular quality of relief that is not emotional, but physical. The release of a sustained stillness that has been maintained at significant internal cost and is now no longer required. He did not move. He waited. The tactical team cleared the warehouse floor in 90 seconds. The back office door opened. 2 agents came in fast, painted Pruitt with their laser sights, and stayed on him while a 3rd agent took a position in the doorway. Pruitt had not moved since the doors came off. He had not lowered his gun, which was still pointed at Tyson's head, because lowering it felt like admitting something, and he had not yet arrived at the specific cognitive destination where he was able to admit anything. He had 27 laser dots on his chest, and his brain was in the process of revising its understanding of the situation from the outside in, starting with the most recently available information and working backward. The working backward was not going well. The CIA director came through the back office door. Her name was Patricia Wainwright. She was 56 years old, silver-haired, dressed in the dark operational clothing she wore when she was personally present at field operations, which she was present at approximately 6 times a year, and which she took seriously enough to dress appropriately for. She had been running the agency's operations directorate for 4 years before her appointment to director, and she had, in those 4 years, run operations in 23 countries involving personnel at every level, from station chiefs to field operators to assets of exactly the classification of the man currently sitting in a chair with his hands cuffed behind his back. She came through the door. She looked at Pruitt. She looked at Tyson. She looked at Pruitt again, specifically at the gun that was still pointed at the back of Tyson's head, with the expression of a woman who has seen a great many things in a great many rooms and has not yet encountered the thing that makes her lose her composure, but is noting that this situation has a higher ambient temperature than most. "Take those cuffs off him," she said. Her voice was not raised. It had the quality of a voice that had never needed volume to communicate the full weight of what it was saying. the voice of someone so far inside the architecture of actual authority that performance of authority had become redundant. Pruitt looked at her. He lowered the gun. He looked at the agents with the laser sights. He looked at the gun in his hand, as if it had recently arrived there without his awareness. An agent crossed the room and took the gun from Pruitt's hand, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has conducted that particular exchange before and knows the exact grip and angle that produces the cleanest transfer. Another agent produced a key and uncuffed Tyson. Tyson stood. He rolled his shoulders once, a movement of simple physical maintenance, not relief, not performance. He looked at his wrists. He looked at Wainwright. "The ledgers are photographed through page 19 of the third volume," he said. "I need approximately 22 more minutes to complete the third volume and the fourth." "You'll have them," Wainwright said. She turned to Pruitt. Pruitt was standing against the far wall of the back office. He had arrived at the wall without specifically deciding to move toward it. It was simply that, as the room filled and reorganized and the meaning of what he had done became clear in stages, he had found himself progressively further from the center of it and closer to the edge. He was 29 years old, and he was looking at Director Wainwright with the expression of a man who has made a calculation and is watching the answer come out. "I'm going to explain something to you," Wainwright said. She stood in front of him at a distance that was not close and not far. The distance of a woman who is speaking to someone she is not angry at personally, but is angry at professionally, and intends to be precise about the distinction. "The man you handcuffed and held at gunpoint is a field operative with 12 years of service conducting classified operations under direct authority of the Central Intelligence Agency. His current mission, which you have now compromised, is part of a 22-month investigation into a cartel financial network with connections to 3 foreign intelligence services and 17 domestic trafficking routes. The intelligence he is collecting tonight would have provided federal prosecutors with documentation supporting 37 felony charges against 11 individuals, 6 of whom are on the FBI's most wanted list." She paused. Not for effect. She was simply precise about which sentence came next. "You were given a direct federal order to hold the perimeter and not enter this building. That order was communicated to you personally by Agent Marcus at 11:33 p.m. You acknowledged it. You signed the coordination log." She let that land for 1 second. "You entered this building at 1:47 a.m. in direct violation of that order. You interfered with an ongoing classified federal operation. You detained and physically restrained a federal asset. You pointed a loaded service weapon at that asset's head." She looked at him steadily. "The operation may be salvageable. We're assessing that now. If it is not salvageable, the cost, in time, in resources, in the risk exposure of personnel who will have to reinsert, will be calculated, and it will be attached to tonight, to what you did tonight." Pruitt opened his mouth. "Don't," Wainwright said, not unkindly. "Anything you say right now will not help you. Speak to your attorney." She turned to the agent beside her. "Process him." The agent stepped forward. "Dane Pruitt, you are under arrest for interference with a federal operation, disobeying a lawful federal order, and unauthorized entry into a federal operational site." He produced handcuffs. "Please put your hands behind your back." Pruitt put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs went on with the same clean click that Pruitt's own had made, hours ago, on someone else's wrists. He registered this without being able to process it yet. The processing was going to take considerably longer than the night. He was not violent. He was not resistant. He stood with his hands behind his back in the back office of a cartel warehouse and looked at the floor in the particular way of a man who has been operating at a high frequency of certainty for a long time and has just encountered the specific thing that frequency cannot handle. He had been on the Madera County Sheriff's Department for 4 years. He had thought, in some vague and entirely unexamined way, that he would be there for 30. He was walked out through the warehouse floor, past the forensic team, past the agents, past the open server racks and evidence markers, and the machinery of a federal operation proceeding with professional calm, and through the doors that had come off their hinges and out into the California night. The night was cold. The stars were visible. The sky did not comment on what had just happened because the sky never did. Tyson sat at the desk in the back office with the camera and the remaining ledgers, and 22 minutes of work in front of him. Around him, the building was in motion, agents processing the scene, a forensic team that had come in with the second SUV beginning their documentation, the coordinating structure of the operation, reorganizing itself around the disruption and continuing. These were professionals, and professionals continued. The disruption was logged. The assessment was underway. The work was proceeding. Tyson opened the third ledger to page 20. He photographed page 20. He photographed page 21. He moved through the ledger with the same methodical precision he had applied to the first 18 pages before the night had produced its interruption, because the interruption was behind him, and the pages were in front of him, and the distance between those two facts was the only meaningful distance. He had been in situations before where the work had to continue through disruption. There was a specific, practiced quality to the resumption, not forcing yourself back into the state you were in before, but simply beginning again at the beginning of the next thing because the next thing was available and the previous thing was not. You didn't have to cross a bridge back to the work. You just started. He was aware of what the officer had done. He was aware of what it had felt like to sit in that chair with a gun at his head and maintain stillness at the level it required. Not emotional cost. He had made his accounting with the emotional costs of his career in a different conversation with himself years ago, in a manner that was still ongoing and that he did not experience as resolution, but as the ongoing practice of carrying things carefully rather than putting them down. But the physical cost of sustained voluntary stillness was its own category of effort, and his body registered it in the specific way effort registers when it ends. Not dramatically, but as a release of tension that had been held so long, it had stopped feeling like tension and only revealed itself as such by its absence. He turned the page. He was not angry at Pruitt. Anger required energy he needed for the ledger, and beyond that practical consideration, he understood Pruitt in a way that made anger feel beside the point. He understood the specific mechanics of how a person of Pruitt's experience and assumptions arrived at the decisions Pruitt had arrived at, not academically, but from the inside, because understanding the mechanics of how people processed what they saw was as central to his work as any technical skill. Pruitt had looked at him in that dark room and seen what Pruitt was equipped to see, and had acted on it with the full confidence of a man whose confidence had never yet been tested by something with the capacity to test it. It had been tested now. The testing was going to be long and probably definitive. That was not something Tyson had caused or wanted. It was the consequence of the night, and consequences were what they were. He turned the page. Wainwright came back into the office at 3:08 and stood in the doorway. "Operation's viable," she said. "We're moving the documentation tonight. The network doesn't know we were here." "Good," Tyson said without looking up from the camera. "The sheriff's department is going to have a complicated week." "That's their problem to solve," Tyson said. "Yes," Wainwright said. She looked at him for a moment. "You're all right?" He looked up from the ledger. "I'm working," he said. She nodded. She turned and went back out. He turned the page. He finished the fourth ledger at 3:34 a.m. He packed the camera into the case it came in, which had a specific foam interior configured for the camera's exact dimensions and which closed with the precision of things designed to close precisely. He put the case in the bag he had brought in. He stood, rolled his neck once, and walked out of the back office into the warehouse floor. The forensic team was still working. Two agents near the entry point were talking in low voices about something unrelated to tonight, the way professionals in long operations talk when the most demanding part of the night has passed and the procedural part has taken over. The SUVs were still inside the building, their engines off, their presence filling the space with the mass of things that had moved very fast and were now very still. Tyson walked to the first SUV and got in the passenger seat. The driver was an agent named Flores who had worked with Tyson on 2 previous operations and who had, over the course of their professional acquaintance, developed a clear and accurate understanding of what Tyson required from him during post-operation transit, professional silence, adequate temperature control, and the absence of the particular conversational gambit where people asked how you were after significant events in a way that expected a specific kind of answer. Flores adjusted the heater by 2 degrees and said nothing, which was exactly right. Tyson looked through the windshield at the warehouse floor. The agents, the forensic team, the orderly continuation of the work. He looked at it the way he looked at most things, with full attention for the necessary duration, and then with the equally deliberate decision to let it be what it was and look at the next thing. The next thing was going to be 8 hours of sleep in a hotel room, and then a debrief, and then whatever came after the debrief, and he found himself looking forward to all of it, with the straightforward anticipation of a man whose relationship with the next thing was not complicated by his relationship with the last thing. He had done what he came to do, everything else was logistics. In the parking lot of a Madera County diner 4 miles from the warehouse, at 4:15 in the morning, Pruitt sat in the back of a federal vehicle and thought about the word rogue. He had used that word about people before. He had used it with the specific moral confidence of a man who knew where the line was and stayed on the right side of it. He had used it about the cartel members he had been surveilling tonight, about the network he had been watching from the perimeter, about people who operated outside the rules for their own benefit, and called it instinct. He thought about his entry through the north window. He thought about his hand on the latch. He thought about standing in the parking lot at 1:45 a.m. in the cold and making the calculation not slowly, not with difficulty, but with the quick automatic confidence of a man who trusted his own assessments and had not yet been given sufficient reason not to. He thought about what the calculation had contained, the movement he thought he had seen, and the possibility of being the officer who found something, and the specific appeal of that possibility to a specific part of himself that he had not examined carefully enough. He thought about Tyson in the chair. He thought about the expression on Tyson's face in the beam of his flashlight. He had registered it as composure, and he understood now that it was something else. Not composure in the sense of managed emotion, composure in the sense of a man who is in complete possession of a situation that another man believes he is controlling, and who is content to let the other man continue to believe that because the situation does not require correction yet. He thought about the radio call, about the specific satisfaction he had felt pressing the transmit button, about the word custody and the word cartel associate and the confidence in his own voice when he said them. He had been certain. He had been entirely certain in the way that you are certain about things you have decided before gathering the evidence rather than after. He thought about Director Wainwright's face when she came through the door. He thought about the 27 laser dots on his chest and the agent who had taken the gun from his hand with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done that many times and found it simple. He thought about the handcuffs, the same model he carried, the same click, going on his own wrists. He thought about the diner sign outside the window, humming in the pre-dawn dark, advertising a breakfast special at 5. He thought about the ordinary morning that was going to happen without him in the ordinary way he had expected to be in it. He thought about his father, who had built things with his hands his entire life and who had told him, in the particular wordless way of men who communicate primarily through example, that the test of a man was not what he did when things were going well. He didn't know yet what the full scope of what was coming looked like. He would know soon. His attorney had been called. The federal charges were specific and documented. The consequences had a shape that he could partially see and could not yet fully see, and the partial visibility was its own kind of difficult. He sat with it. Outside, the morning was arriving. Trucks, an early commuter, a county road beginning to organize itself around the ordinary requirements of an ordinary day. Pruitt looked at the diner sign and sat with what he had done, which was the only available thing. 12 years is a long time to be quiet, not silent. Tyson could and did speak, when speaking served the work. He could be charming, persuasive, commanding, whatever the operational context required. He had voices for hotel lobbies and boardrooms and the backs of taxis in cities he did not know and was not supposed to know. He had the social facility of a man who had been trained to be whatever a room required. What he was underneath all of it was quiet. The quiet was not emptiness. It was not the absence of things. It was what was left when you removed everything that wasn't strictly necessary. The performance, the posturing, the reflexive self-assertion that most people deployed in most rooms as a way of establishing where they stood. He had stripped all of that away over 12 years, not through discipline exactly, but through the repeated experience of being in situations where it served no purpose and cost significant things. He had been in rooms where the wrong word was the last word. He had been in rooms where the wrong expression was the wrong expression. He had been in rooms where the quality of his stillness was the thing that kept someone alive long enough for the situation to resolve. Not because the stillness was impressive or dramatic, but because the stillness was genuinely what he was, and genuinely being something was harder to see through than performing it. Pruitt had looked at him in a dark room and decided what he saw. He had made the decision quickly and fully, and had committed to it with all the authority at his disposal. What he had seen was a man in a hoodie. What was actually there was 12 years of the most specific and demanding professional development available to someone in this country, compressed into a person who had made the deliberate choice to be exactly as unremarkable as possible on the surface. The surface was the point. The surface was the work. What was left when you stripped everything away was the capacity to sit in a chair in a dark room with a gun at your head and give the person holding the gun nothing to work with. This was not nothing. It was, in the specific vocabulary of his profession, everything. The ledgers were in federal custody. The documentation was admissible. The network didn't know. 22 months of patient, unglamorous, entirely unannounced work had reached its conclusion, and the conclusion was simply the next thing. Tyson Cross watched the California highway move past the window of the moving SUV. The horizon was beginning to lighten in the very earliest way horizons lighten before the sun commits to it. He was going to sleep for 8 hours, then the debrief, then the next briefing, then whatever the next thing turned out to be. He had been doing the next thing for 12 years. He was not tired of it. He was simply and completely and without drama ready for it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're here for stories about the kind of people who are most dangerous when they're most quiet. Leave a comment below. Have you ever stayed perfectly still in a situation where everything in you wanted to react? Tell us what that cost you and what it got you.